I never planned to become the bride who brought a man to his knees, not in devotion, but in devastation. Yet, life has a funny way of rewriting your story when you least expect it. And on the night before my wedding, fate handed me a truth I never asked for. Tomorrow I would return the favor. Nathaniel Kavanagh and I had been together for 3 years. 3 years of curated perfection, where every dinner party, every gala, every whispered promise felt like part of a fairy tale I had somehow stumbled into. He was everything I thought I wanted, brilliant, powerful, polished. The kind of man who could silence a room with a smile and seal a business deal with a single handshake. To most, he was untouchable. To me, he was home. Or so I believed. His mother, Victoria, had taken me in like her own. After losing my parents in a fire when I was 17, I never thought I'd find that kind of maternal warmth again. But she gave it freely. Afternoon teas, heirloom recipes, stories of the Kavanagh legacy dating back to the Boston Tea Party. And Lena, his younger sister, became the best friend I never had. I was the girl from nowhere. And they made me feel like I finally belonged somewhere. The rehearsal dinner had ended hours ago. Nathaniel had kissed my forehead and disappeared with his friends for one last night of bachelor freedom. I hadn't planned to follow, but as I unpacked the final details for the morning, I realized I had forgotten one thing: his grandfather's cufflinks. They were a gift from Victoria, meant to be worn as a blessing for legacy and fidelity. The irony would strike me later. I called down to the concierge at the Kavanagh Grand Hotel, where the bachelor party was being held just 2 blocks from our Beacon Hill penthouse. The staff knew me well. We'd hosted more than a few fundraising events and charity auctions there. They didn't hesitate to direct me to the private lounge. I should have knocked. I should have made some noise. I should have done anything other than stand still when I heard my fiancé's voice. Nathaniel's laughter floated through the half-open door. That signature, low-pitched chuckle that always made me feel safe, now carved into my memory like a blade. Then came Grayson Hale, his best man, his college roommate, the man who'd once toasted to our eternal love with a $5,000 bottle of scotch. Come on, man. You're not seriously going to tie yourself down with Evelyn Harper, are you? Grayson's voice was thick with amusement. Why not? Nathaniel replied, slurring slightly. She's perfect on paper. Orphan background makes for a good PR story, and her nonprofit contacts are already opening doors. Once we get the merger through, everything else falls into place. Someone else laughed. Then she's just a placeholder, Nathaniel added, until someone better comes along. Someone with pedigree. The air left my lungs in one silent exhale. I stood there in the shadows, clutching a small velvet box I had once thought of as a symbol of legacy. Now it felt like a funeral urn for something already dead. 3 years. 3 years of love, of laughter, of trust. All of it shattered in one overheard confession. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't burst through the door like some jilted soap opera character. Instead, I turned and walked away. Slowly, deliberately, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. Back at home, I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop, entered our shared business accounts, because, yes, I wasn't just the fiancé. I was also the silent co-founder of Kavanagh Global Impact Fund. I had helped build his empire, and now I would burn it down. By dawn, I had enough digital threads to trace something far more sinister than emotional betrayal. Offshore accounts, redirected charitable funds, correspondence between Nathaniel and Camilla Rhodes, his partner, both in business and evidently in bed. The woman he planned to marry was just the decoy. The real merger was happening elsewhere, but the wedding would still go on. Only this time, the bride wouldn't be walking toward a future. She'd be walking into war. I never imagined I'd be plotting revenge in my wedding gown. But as dawn crept through the windows of our penthouse, painting the city in shades of gray and gold, I sat in silence, my laptop glowing in the dim room like a loaded weapon. Nathaniel had underestimated me. He thought I was just a pretty accessory to complete his brand. He forgot I was the one who built the back end of his empire, the one who knew where the paper trail started, and more importantly, where it ended. While the city slept, I traced every transaction he thought was invisible. Shell companies in the Caymans, slush funds hidden beneath philanthropic grants, a trail of donations that led straight back to Camilla Rhodes, the woman he planned to marry after draining me dry. She sat on the board of Kavanaugh Global, cloaked in respectability and privilege. But now I had emails, intimate, incriminating, time-stamped. One thread alone was enough to bury them both. But I didn't stop there. I made 3 calls before sunrise. First, to a private investigator I had worked with once during a background check on a high-profile donor. Discreet, expensive, and worth every dollar. Second, to Julian Wu, a Pulitzer-nominated financial reporter who owed me a favor after I fed him a nonprofit scandal 2 years prior. And last, to someone within the Department of Justice. I didn't give my name, just a burner email, and a list of encrypted files titled Project Kavanaugh. The spark had been lit. By the time the city stirred, my strategy was already in motion. I had evidence uploaded to cloud storage, timed emails set to release, and a small team of journalists, lawyers, and federal agents who had no idea the woman pulling the strings was the bride they'd be reading about by morning. At 8:12 a.m., Lena arrived at the bridal suite at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, her face lit with the kind of joy I couldn't return. "You look like a Roman goddess," she squealed, wrapping her arms around me. I smiled gently, letting her warmth soak into my skin just long enough to remember what it felt like to be loved by someone who meant it. "This is really happening, Eve," she whispered. "You're going to be a Kavanaugh." I didn't have the heart to tell her the name she cherished was about to go up in flames. By mid-morning, Victoria swept in like royalty. Her pearls gleamed against her navy silk dress, and in her hands she held a small velvet box. "This belonged to Nathaniel's grandmother," she said, fastening the delicate necklace around my neck. "She wore it on her wedding day. I wanted you to have it." The pearls felt cold against my skin. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice catching for a second. "You've been more of a mother to me than anyone I ever knew." Her eyes softened, and for a moment I almost broke. Almost. The next hour passed in a blur of curling irons, champagne flutes, and soft ballads playing from someone's playlist. My phone buzzed beneath the vanity table. Coded updates from my PI and Julian. Offshore confirmations secured. Photographers and press planted among the guests. DOJ contact in final position. I stared at my reflection. High cheekbones, steady eyes, scarlet lips. I looked like a bride, but what I saw was a storm in silk. At exactly 11:47 a.m., a knock came. 30 minutes, Lena called cheerfully from behind the door. I slid the cream-colored envelope from beneath the drawer and slipped it into a hidden pocket sewn into my dress. The weight of it anchored me, reminded me that this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a corporate crime, a deception so vast it had touched not only my heart, but hundreds of innocent employees who had no idea their 401(k)s were balancing on a lie. I stepped into my heels. I picked up the bouquet, white peonies and blush roses, and I felt their petals like fragile reminders of everything Nathaniel had tried to fake. I'd asked the florist for one red dahlia in the center. It meant betrayal, a message only I would understand. The ceremony was held at St. Benedict's Cathedral, the grandest venue in Boston. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon as I stepped into the vestibule. My phone buzzed one final time. "Everyone in position," the message read. "Time to go." I deleted it and walked forward, not toward love, but toward reckoning. The church doors closed behind the last bridesmaid, leaving me alone with the silence. Through the heavy wooden doors, I could hear the final notes of the canon fade into stillness. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. I felt calm, As if my body already knew this wasn't a wedding march, it was a war procession. I adjusted the lace at my wrist and checked one last time that the envelope was secure in the hidden slit of my dress. Then I whispered to the coordinator beside me, "I'm ready." The grand oak doors creaked open. A flood of golden light spilled into the church as the music shifted to the wedding march. 200 guests rose to their feet in unison, their heads turned toward me, toward the image of the perfect bride. I walked slowly, the bouquet steady in my hands, the dahlia bleeding red against the ivory silk. Nathaniel stood tall at the altar, handsome and composed, his smile polished to perfection. He didn't know he had less than 5 minutes left in the world he built. As I walked, memories flickered like ghosts along the aisle. His proposal in Tuscany under the stars. The night he stayed up to help me build the first pitch deck for the Impact Fund. The way he used to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear and say, "You're my beginning and my legacy." Every image now soured, not with grief, but with clarity. 3 steps from the altar, I caught Grayson's gaze in the front pew. His smirk faltered. 2 steps. I saw Camilla seated next to a state senator's wife, her navy dress pristine, her expression unreadable. 1 step. I looked at Victoria, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, glowing with pride, and Lena, beaming, giving me a subtle thumbs up from behind the bridesmaids' row. Nathaniel leaned in, his voice low and rehearsed. "You look like something out of a dream." I smiled, took a half step back. "Not quite," I said, and turned to face the crowd. The music died. A hush fell over the cathedral. "Before we begin," I said, my voice smooth, unwavering, "I'd like to share a few words. Not from scripture, but from a collection of emails, dated across the past 18 months. Written by the man I was about to marry." A stunned silence. Then, shifting, a cough. Camilla's lips pressed into a line. I pulled the envelope from my dress, broke the seal. The paper crackled in my hands as I opened the first page. "To Camilla Rhodes," I read aloud, subject line, "Post-wedding strategy. Once the Harper merger is secured, I'll move forward with dissolving her stake. She suspects nothing. Her devotion is a tool, and timing is everything." Gasps echoed from the pews. Nathaniel stepped forward. "Evelyn, what the hell are you doing?" I held up a hand, cutting him off. "I'm just getting started." I turned another page. As for the offshore accounts, I paused, scanning the audience. Well, perhaps it's best if the SEC representative in the third pew hears about those firsthand, or the journalists scattered throughout this church. At that moment, the church doors opened again. 2 men in dark suits entered. No fanfare, just quiet precision. Nathaniel's mask cracked. "You're ruining everything." "No," I said softly. "I'm revealing everything." I dropped the pages. One by one, they fluttered to the marble floor like snow. Each a confession, each a nail in the coffin of his legacy. "I trusted you," I said, my voice rising with steel. "I built your company. I gave you my past, my name, my future, and you called me temporary." The silence that followed was deeper than any prayer. Camilla stood abruptly. "I need to leave," she muttered, but one of the agents moved to block her path. Grayson shrank in his seat. Victoria rose, her face pale. "Nathaniel, what is she talking about?" she demanded. "Mother, I can't explain." "She doesn't need your explanation," I cut in. "She needs the truth, and she's about to hear it, just like everyone else." The agents stepped forward. "Nathaniel Kavanagh," one of them said, "you're under investigation for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." He turned to me, panicked. "Evelyn, please. We can fix this. I still love you." I tilted my head, stepped closer, my voice like glass. "Then you should have loved me enough to respect me, not use me." Victoria gasped. Lena sobbed. I removed the pearl necklace from around my throat and handed it to Victoria. This belongs to a family that stood for something. Yours no longer does. Nathaniel was cuffed and led down the same aisle I had just walked. Cameras flashed. Guests whispered. Camilla followed, face flushed and furious. And I stood at the altar alone, surrounded by shattered expectations and paper confessions. Then I turned, lifted my chin, and walked back down the aisle, bouquet in hand, but no longer as a bride. As something else entirely. The doors opened. The spring sunlight hit me full in the face. A crowd of reporters waited on the steps. I smiled, just slightly, and stepped into the light. The headlines exploded before I even reached my apartment. Runaway bride exposes billion-dollar fraud. Kavanaugh dynasty crumbles at the altar. Charity queen turns whistleblower. The media swarmed outside my building, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken louder than any statement I could make. Camilla Rhodes was arrested within 24 hours. Her lawyers claimed she was blindsided. The email evidence told another story. Grayson Hale lawyered up, but it was too late. His name was all over the slush fund ledger, buried beneath fake consulting contracts. Nathaniel was denied bail. The risk of flight was too high. Lena called me sobbing. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. I could have helped. But we both knew she couldn't. Her love for her brother had always been her blindest spot. Victoria's silence was more deafening. It wasn't until 3 days later that she appeared at my door, holding the same velvet box that had once carried her family's pearls. "They belong to you now," she said, pressing them into my hands. "Because you didn't just save yourself. You saved what little dignity this family had left." I didn't cry. I couldn't. I had moved past grief and rage. I had entered something sharper, purpose. Within weeks, I founded the Harper Integrity Group, a consulting firm built to prevent exactly what I had exposed. I hired experts in forensic accounting, whistleblower law, and corporate governance. What started as a team of 5 quickly grew into 30, then 70, with offices in Boston and D.C. Clients came flooding in, not because of who I was before, but because of what I stood for now. Universities began asking me to speak. First Harvard, then Yale, then Stanford. My inbox overflowed with messages from women. Men, interns, assistants, CEOs, each with their own story of betrayal, silence, fear. I read every word. I answered when I could. The world hadn't run out of corruption. It just needed more people brave enough to confront it. The Kavanaugh name was stripped from every corporate building within months. Lena took over a small division of what was left, determined to rebuild it into something honest. Victoria donated half her personal wealth to a foundation focused on ethical leadership. We didn't speak often, but when we did, there was something like mutual understanding in the silence. Nathaniel tried writing to me. Letters filled with apologies, explanations, desperate nostalgia. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. I'd already read everything that mattered the night before our wedding. Grayson disappeared to Arizona. Rumors said he was working in insurance under a fake name. Camilla flipped on Nathaniel during the investigation, trading her sentence for testimony. She got 5 years. Nathaniel, 15. No parole. The night before the sentencing, I stood by my window, looking out over Boston Common. I had traded in our penthouse for something smaller, simpler, with wide glass windows and a view of the city I had once wanted to conquer alongside him. Now I looked down on it not with ambition, but with clarity. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. I sat in the front row beside Lena and Victoria. When Nathaniel entered in shackles and a muted jumpsuit, he scanned the room until his eyes met mine. For the first time, he didn't smile. The judge read the charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, securities manipulation. The sentence came down like a gavel through marble, 15 years served in full. When it was over, Nathaniel looked at me, and mouthed something I couldn't quite make out. It didn't matter. Whatever story he had told himself about me had ended the moment I had stepped away from that altar. I walked out of that courtroom free. Not because justice had been served, but because I had chosen to fight for it. I didn't just leave him at the altar. I left behind the version of myself who once thought love could fix a man bent on control. 6 months after the sentencing, I stood before a lecture hall at Stanford Business School, the words Montgomery Case Study, replaced now by its real title, The Kavanaugh Collapse. I had just finished a keynote on corporate fraud detection when a hand rose from the front row. MS. Harper, the student asked, voice steady, what was the hardest part of choosing truth over love? I smiled, resting my hand on the podium. Real love doesn't ask you to choose, I said. Only illusions do. After the lecture, a man approached me, tall, quiet, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, only earned it. Dr. Adrian Lin, he said, extending a hand. I teach business ethics here. Your experience, it's changed the way we teach accountability. There was something different about him. Not charm, not polish, just steadiness. A sincerity I hadn't felt in years. Our conversations began professionally, syllabi, curriculum development, joint workshops. But they grew. Coffee meetings turned into evening walks through campus. Debates over corporate case studies turned into shared dinners. And somewhere between lectures and laughter, something else formed. Something slow, gentle, real. Adrian never asked about Nathaniel. He never tried to compete with ghosts. Instead, he listened when I chose to share. And when I told him everything, from the cufflinks to the courtroom, he didn't flinch. You didn't destroy anything, he said one night. You revealed what was already broken. That's not vengeance. That's courage. 2 years after the wedding that wasn't, I stood in front of a full-length mirror in a different white dress. This one was simpler. No corset, no train, no hidden pockets. Just silk, light and strong, like the woman who wore it. Victoria stood behind me, misty-eyed as she adjusted the hem. This time, she whispered, you're not walking toward power. You're walking with it. Adrian and I married in the botanical garden where we'd once mapped out an ethics curriculum on a park bench. The ceremony was small, families, students, colleagues, friends who had seen me unravel and rebuild. Lena toasted with tears in her eyes. To my sister, not by blood, but by choice, who showed me that truth can be a weapon, but also a home. Our consulting firm had expanded to 3 countries by then. Harper & Lin was now the gold standard for corporate ethics. Companies brought us in not just after scandals, but before them. We trained boards, advised regulators, and mentored the next generation of business leaders. The Kavanaugh name was no longer a stain. It had become a case study, a warning, yes, but also a turning point. Nathaniel never appealed his sentence. From time to time, letters came from his facility. I read one. Just one. In it, he wrote, you didn't just expose me. You saved me, not from prison, but from myself. I didn't reply. Some closure doesn't need words. Some ghosts dissolve in the silence. 5 years to the day after the night I stood outside that hotel door, I was invited back to speak at a global ethics summit, held at the same ballroom of the Kavanaugh Grand Hotel. I walked in not as a guest, not as a bride, but as a keynote speaker. My heels echoed against the marble floor like a new kind of music. Diana and Lena sat in the front row. Adrian's hand found mine as I stepped to the podium. You're here because you believe business can be done with integrity. I began, looking out at a room full of CEOs, attorneys, and whistleblowers. Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. The greatest threat to truth is not corruption. It's comfort. The willingness to ignore a red flag because it's wrapped in a velvet box. That night, under the same chandelier that once watched my world collapse, Adrian and I danced. I caught Victoria's smile from across the room. She lifted her glass in a quiet toast, and I returned it with a nod. Not to revenge, but to something better. The pearl necklace I once returned now sat in a glass case at our firm's headquarters. Beneath it, a plaque that read, "Integrity is the most valuable inheritance." Months later, Adrian and I welcomed our daughter. We named her Grace, because that's what this journey had been. Grace through pain, through fire, through truth. One afternoon, while holding her in my arms, I wrote the final line of the ethics curriculum we'd spent years building. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't saying "I do." It's saying "I won't" to lies, to fear, to anything that asks you to shrink for someone else's comfort. Grace slept peacefully beside me as I signed off the final draft. I looked out the window, the Boston skyline framed in the soft glow of dusk. I had lost a wedding, lost a man, lost an illusion, but I had found something far greater, myself.